Good morning, dear students. Today we have a new story from our supplementary book, A Tiger in the House. Okay, so just see the animation.
Timothy, the tiger cub, was discovered by grandfather in the Terai jungle near Tehran. One day, when grandfather was strolling down the forest path at some distance from the rest of the party, he discovered a little tiger about 18 inches long, hiding among the intricate ruins of a banyan tree. Grandfather picked him up and brought him home. He had the distinction of being the only member of the party to have bagged any game.
Okay, so here in the start, grandfather roaming in the forest and he found a bear cub, a tiger cub, and he brought him at home.
Dead or alive? At first, the tiger cub, who was named Timothy by grandmother, was brought up entirely on milk given to him in a feeding bottle by our cook, Mehmood. But the milk proved too rich for him, and he was put on a diet of raw mutton and cod liver oil, to be followed later by a more tempting diet of pigeons and rabbits.
Firstly, grandfather treated him like a baby and he started giving him milk, but milk was not good food for a tiger cub. That's why grandmother suggested him he should have some raw mutton as their meal.
Timothy was provided with two companions, Toto the monkey, who was bold enough to pull the young tiger by the tail and then climb up the curtains if Timothy lost his temper.
In this picture we are seeing here the monkey and a dog who is playing with the tiger cub, and they were the companion of Timothy. Timothy was the name of tiger cub.
And a small mongrel puppy found in the road by grandfather. At first, Timothy appeared to be quite afraid of the puppy and darted back with a spring if it came too near. He would make absurd dashes at it with his large forepaws and then retreat to a ridiculously safe distance. Finally, he allowed the puppy to crawl on his back and rest there. One of Timothy's favorite amusements was to stalk anyone who would play with him. And so, when I ate in the cook's quarters and was always delighted.
Okay, so here in this paragraph, we are seeing that the nature of Timothy that was just he was coming younger, so his nature become changed with his companion, with Toto and the dog. That's why grandfather decided him to shift in the servant's quarter.
I did at being let out by him in the morning. One of these days, declared grandmother in her prophetic manner, we are going to find Timothy sitting on Mehmood's bed and no sign of the cook except his clothes and shoes. Of course, it never came to that, but when Timothy was about 6 months old, a change came over him. He grew steadily less friendly. When out for a walk with me, he would try to steal away to stalk a cat or someone's pet dog.
So according to this, some physical changes started coming to his body.
Sometimes at night, we would hear frenzied cackling from the poultry house, and in the morning, there would be feathers lying all over the veranda. Timothy had to be chained up more often. And finally, when he began to stalk Mehmood about the house with what looked like willingness intent, grandfather decided it was time to transfer him to a zoo.
Okay, just because of these changes in his body and in nature, grandfather decided him to transfer to the zoo.
2. Reserving a first-class compartment for himself and Timothy, no one would share a compartment with them. Grandfather took him to Lucknow, where the zoo authorities were only too glad to receive as a gift a well-fed and fairly civilized tiger.
Okay, so grandfather just booked the first class ticket for Timothy, and no one trying to share compartment with them, and they reached Lucknow for safe into zoo.
About 6 months later, when my grandparents were visiting relatives in Lucknow, grandfather took the opportunity of calling at the zoo to see how Timothy was getting on. I was not there to accompany him, but I heard all about it when I returned to Tehran.
When he shifted in, after some time, grandfather and grandmother visited to Dehra, just to his relative's home, and in this sequence, they decided to meet Timothy, how is he, and he went to the zoo.
Arriving at the zoo, grandfather made straight for the particular cage in which Timothy had been interned. The tiger was there, crouched in a corner, full grown and with a magnificent striped coat.
Hello, Timothy,
Said grandfather and put his arm through the bars of the cage.
So grandfather reached the zoo and met Timothy and say hi.
The tiger approached the bars and allowed grandfather to put both hands around his head. Grandfather stroked the tiger's forehead and tickled his ears. And whenever he growled, smacked him across the mouth, which was his old way of keeping him quiet. He licked grandfather's hands and only sprang away when a leopard in the next cage snarled at him. Grandfather shooed the leopard away, and the tiger returned to lick his hands. But every now and then, the leopard would rush at the bars, and he would slink back to his corner.
When the grandfather met Timothy, he just observed that things Timothy is getting to bad changes as the influence of neighboring leopard. So he suggested the zoo member and authority to take away Timothy from this leopard.
A number of people had gathered to watch the reunion when a keeper pushed his way through the crowd and asked grandfather what he was doing.
I'm talking to Timothy.
Said grandfather.
Weren't you here when I gave him to the zoo 6 months ago? I haven't been here very long.
Said the surprised keeper.
Please continue your conversation. But I have never been able to touch him myself. He's always very bad-tempered. Why don't you put him somewhere else?
Suggested grandfather.
That leopard keeps frightening him. I'll go and see the superintendent about it.
Grandfather went in search of the superintendent of the zoo, but found that he had gone home early, and so, after wandering about the zoo for a little while, he returned to Timothy's cage to say goodbye.
Okay, when the superintendent of zoo came to the grandfather and tell him, I can't believe it, how you are behaving with this tiger cub, because we don't have where to touch him like this. But grandfather told him these bad changes came just because of influence of this leopard in the neighboring cage. So you must have to change the place of Timothy.
It was beginning to get dark. He had been stroking and slapping Timothy for about 5 minutes when he found another keeper observing him with some alarm. Grandfather recognized him as the keeper who had been there when Timothy had first come to the zoo.
Okay, then grandfather met a person who took Timothy to the zoo first time.
You remember me?
Said grandfather.
Now why don't you transfer Timothy to another cage, away from this stupid leopard? But sir...
Stammered the keeper.
It's not your tiger. I know.
Said grandfather.
I realize he's no longer mine. But you might at least take a suggestion or two from me. I remember your tiger very well.
Said the keeper.
He died 2 months ago. Died?
Exclaimed grandfather.
Okay, when he talked with the person at the zoo, he told him that his tiger has been dead for 2 months. These news made him shocked.
Yes, sir, of pneumonia. This tiger was trapped in the hills only last month, and he is very dangerous.
Grandfather could think of nothing to say. The tiger was still licking his arm. With increasing relish, grandfather took what seemed to him an age to withdraw his hand from the cage. With his face near the tiger's, he mumbled,
Good night, Timothy.
and giving the keeper a scornful look, walked briskly out of the zoo.
Okay, so grandfather, when heard about the death of Timothy, he became very sad, and also the person who met in the zoo told him that this tiger is shifted just before 2 months ago, and he is very dangerous, so don't touch him. But grandfather felt like if Timothy is in the cage, and tell him good night, Timothy, and we have finished